Allan Savory is a Zimbabwean farmer, environmentalist, soldier, exile, and biologist. Allan Savory.
Thank you. Good morning, all. I imagine living in a beautiful city like Houston with all the things you have around you, most of you feel very secure in your lives apart from hackers and liars. But you, like all of our cities in the world, are under great threat. All that you hold dear, your families, your businesses, your beautiful cities, for reasons that I will explain, but this is not a doomsday talk at all. Everything that we do is dependent on agriculture. Without agriculture, you cannot have a church, you cannot have an orchestra, you cannot have this conference, you cannot have any of the things, including a city or any business. Without agriculture, you would all be out hunting, gathering, growing food. Please believe me, every day. Now, agriculture is not crop production, as you're told in mainline thinking. Agriculture is the production of food and fiber from all of the world's land and waters. And only about 20% of the land is cropland, 18% roughly in the United States. Now, with everything that we do dependent on agriculture, how are we doing? Let's look at the massive disconnect we have from reality. When we look at how we're doing, what we find is that we're producing more than 70 billion tons of eroding soil every year. That is more than 10 tons of eroding, damaged soil, destroyed soil, for every human alive, and our population is going to go up to 10 billion, and we have 2 billion going hungry every day at the moment. And we need about half a ton of food to keep a human alive, healthy for a year. This is the most frightening statistic in the world, I believe. Now, when we look at the other aspects of agriculture, we find it's causing global desertification. We're going to fight worse wars over water than over oil. It's causing the silting of ocean shelves around the continents and dams, amazing amount of poverty around the world, social breakdown, abuse of women and children, violence and war, droughts and floods increasing dramatically because the available rainfall is made non-effective, biodiversity loss, and climate change. And agriculture, frankly, is causing climate change more than fossil fuels, as you are told. Agriculture is without question the most damaging industry we have in the world, more so than any other extractive industry. But we hardly talk about it, we're hardly aware of it. Now, when so many things are going wrong in the most vital area of our lives, and so many millions of brilliant scientists, universities, farmers, etc., involved, and have been over centuries, it tells you something is fundamentally wrong, a systemic problem at the bottom of it. Now, I became deeply concerned with this as a young man about 60 years ago and determined to try to find a solution to it, beginning with wildlife, which was my interest in Africa, and seeing that what affected wildlife affected humans. And it's essentially a management problem, not a research problem, as I realized early in my life. Now, over the many years, I've been helped by a great many people, fellow scientists, farmers, pastoralists, etc., and gradually, after many mistakes, blind leads, etc., was able to finally understand what was causing it and how we might remedy that. Now, this has been a long and tortuous path of many failures and so on, but in hindsight, I can explain it to you fairly simply. Fortunately for us, there is one simple thing that is causing all of it, and it is profoundly simple, and it is the genetically embedded way that humans make decisions in management and our lives. Every one of us, no human immune from it, it's genetically embedded. Let me explain it to you simply. We're a tool-using animal. You cannot drink water now, if I tell you to drink water, without a glass or a cup, which is technology, you would have to go to the nearest river and drink with your mouth or scoop it up with your hands. Now, when we look at the tools we use as a tool-using animal, let's look at them. About 1 million years ago, we got the tool of sticks and stones. We could chip the stones and sharpen the sticks, like other tool-using animals that weren't quite capable of doing that. And we could not affect our environment at all. Then somewhere during the last 1 million years, we got the tool of fire. And then in relatively recent time after that, we finally learned to melt stones and were able to get into the copper, the bronze, the iron age and develop our technology. So it's still the tool of technology. And every single thing you see in this room, and the clothes you're wearing and everything, was made possible by fire. Without fire, we couldn't have made the machines to weave the clothes that you're wearing. So for most of human existence, 99% of human existence, we had two tools, technology and fire. Nothing else. Then, around about 10,000 years ago, sometime after domestication of plants and animals, we developed the idea of another tool, and that was to rest the land or the environment to let it recover, positively rest it. Probably developed by crop farmers rotating their crops or pastoralists moving their animals. Now, if you can train in any university in the world, in any profession, as many of you were, and I can promise you, you will only be trained to use technology, fire, or resting land. No other tool. We only have 3 tools in our tool bag. Now, when we, sorry, I got a mental blank there. In a recent TED talk, I gave a talk about the need to add another tool. And I showed this picture of the world and the areas circled in red. Those are the areas where the rainfall is seasonal and you have to have biological decay of billions of tons of vegetation that die every year. And nothing else can do that except livestock. Only livestock can now save those situations, and that's the most problematic region of the world, and it includes more than half of Texas in that. Now, when we look at the 3 tools that we have, no technology even imaginable can do what is required on the scale needed around 2/3 of the world's land. When we look at fire, it is rapid oxidation and leads to desertification and climate change. And when we look at resting land, it leads to oxidation, bare ground, and climate change in those environments. In the humid environments, it leads to full recovery of biodiversity and everything we hold dear. So it became necessary to add another tool to our tool bag. Now, that problem we solved in the 1960s when we learned to use what's actually a military planning technique to learn how to plan the movement of livestock to mimic nature and reverse desertification. Now, with that, we were able to get very good results in the 60s, but they were still erratic. And as you know, in science, if we're getting erratic decisions, not consistent results, something else is lacking. So we had to keep going. Now, to discover why we couldn't get consistent results, we had to return to the genetic way we make decisions. Now, how is that? Think about it. Every conscious decision we make is towards an objective. The objective to come to this meeting, the objective to buy the dress you've got, the clothes you've got, whatever. Every decision is made that way. Now, objectives need a context. So if I were to say to you, I'm going to light a fire, you would have no idea whether that was sensible or stupid. If you knew it was to cook our food or warm us, heat the water or something, it would be sensible. If I was just going to light a fire, it could burn the building down. We have loose cannons on the deck if we have objectives without an adequate context. Now, just as a full sentence in English needs a noun and a verb, so a management action needs an objective and a sensible context. Now let me break down all that we do into two areas to help make this simple. Everything we make and everything we manage. When we look at everything we make, and that's everything in this room and around the city, it's 100% use of technology. We cannot make anything without technology, from a basket, weaving a basket, to a computer. When we look at everything we make, it is complicated, can be very complicated. It's not self-organizing. It doesn't work if a part is missing. It is, by definition, not complex, even our exploration into space. Now, when we look at the things we manage, they are, by definition, complex. We use some technology, but mostly we're dealing with people, organizations, and nature. And everything there is self-organizing, works if a part is missing, and is, by definition, complex. When we look at the things we make, we're amazingly successful. We can even put a man on the moon. When we look at the things we manage that are complex by definition, we find that there is something fundamentally wrong there, because we get short-term successes and mostly long-term failures and many, many unintended consequences. So something is wrong in the way that we manage things, and it's associated with objectives. Now, fortunately, this is rather like the film once, Apollo 13. Houston, we have a problem. But this problem is fixable, and it's a single problem. Now, when we look at the things that we manage, the objectives, the problem is they are too simple for the social, environmental, and economic complexity that is always involved in everything we manage. So if we look at global finance, global economy, right through to agriculture, we're running into increasing problems because the context is always too simple. When we look at the context in our many, many management actions, it is always the need. I needed a car, so I bought one. Or I needed a dress for the occasion. Or we needed profit to sustain the family. And when we look at policies and development projects, without exception, around the world, the context is always the problem that we are dealing with in that situation. Now, with such simple contexts that are obvious in these actions, it's very clear that they cannot deal with the social, environmental, and economic complexity that we face, that are inescapable. So we can expect many unintended consequences. So let's look at some results. We often achieve the result, but with consequences. We decide to grow corn, we grow masses of it. We decide to grow sugarcane, we grow masses of it. We're successful. Then we decide to make more profit by diversifying the product and increasing the shelf life. All obvious, all successful. What is the consequence? We end up with something like 300,000 people a year dying because of excessive obesity, low nutrition, high calorific diets. This is more than the yearly death rate in 2 world wars for this country. When we look at any one of these policies, we're going to find the same thing. Look at the drugs policy in the United States. Well-intentioned, many objectives, many of them achieved. What is the result? Drug use has increased, and we have more people in jails than Stalin had at the height of his reign. When we look at the weed policy in Texas and the United States generally, since I've been in the United States, we've had the objective of killing the weeds with technology. What has been the result? We've spent over $12 billion, and we've poisoned the environment, increased health problems, and we haven't succeeded in killing a single weed in a single state, but we keep on with these unintended consequences. Now, 30 years ago, we discovered that management needs to be holistic, embracing all sciences, traditional, other sources of knowledge. And to do that, we learned how to define a different form of context that wasn't in any religion of the world, any branch of science, any philosophy, and that we called a holistic context that ties our deepest values through forms of production to our life support system. Now, doing that enabled us to begin to deal with the social, environmental, and economic complexity we faced, and not to have the unintended consequences that we got so used to seeing. So here we have the genetic way we've always done things, objectives, missions, visions, etc. Three tools we used, always our decisions made on one or more factors: research results, past experience, cost, cash flow, intuition, expediency, whatever, and always the context very, very simple. Successful in what we make, less successful in what we manage. Now to that, it's like every one of us has this most incredible computer in our minds, the brain, the human brain. It is the most amazing computer ever developed. What we didn't know was we're all using the same genetic software, and there were two glitches in the software. So all we had to do was add a tool without which we couldn't have saved more than 20 civilizations that have already failed due to agriculture, and the idea of a holistic context to enable us to deal with the social environmental consequences and prevent them. Now, from here on, I can only talk to you about results. Let's look at some results. In the TED talk, I talked about the desertification, adding the tool, and the planning process, and I won't go any further into it here. We are already doing that on over 40 million acres on 5 of the 7 continents. Only haven't got it going in the Arctic and the Antarctic yet. Now, what about policy? In the early 80s, the USDA engaged me over a 2-year period to put 2,000 professional people through training in using this simple, new, slight modification in policy. They brought hundreds of US policies to that training, analyzed them, and could not find a single policy that would succeed and wouldn't have unintended consequences. One group in training had a heated discussion, then made a statement that we recorded, and that went, "We now recognize that unsound resource management is universal in the United States." Now, those people came from the Forest Service, the US Bureau of Indian Affairs, Soil Conservation Service, the World Bank, and from faculty of Western universities. That was an astounding result. Recently, I got an opportunity to do this with 35 members of Parliament in my own country, and I reminded them of a statement their president had made, where he said, "We do not have a bigger problem than our rising population, our deteriorating environment, but we politicians do not know what to do. We can only take the advice of professional advisors, but when it goes wrong, we get the blame, no, not they." We then formed or defined a national holistic context, and everything soared above politics and pressure groups. By the end of the workshop, we had the basis of an agricultural policy the world dreams of. We'd be producing more food than eroding soil. There would be no certifications because all food would be clean, healthy, growing on regenerating soils. We got 2 immediate reactions to that. One was a mixture of sadness and anger. They said, "Why hasn't anybody ever explained how simple this is to do? All of the knowledge we need is already available." The second was a request for us to do that at cabinet level, which I'm now trying to set up. So I'd like to conclude now by saying that I don't believe any scientist today would argue that management needs to be holistic, embracing all of science, etc. How do we bring that about? Most citizens are in cities, which is where the power, economic power, voting power has moved to, and when people in cities are insisting that policies be formed holistically, it can be done. Until then, it cannot be done because of the nature of complexity in human organizations. It can only come about when the citizens demand it. I'd like to remind you of the Wright brothers. For thousands of years, we tried to fly. Hundreds of men died. Finally, on a given day, the Wright brothers flew. There were no barriers put in the way because everybody thought of technology as a tool and an answer. And within 70 years, we were on the moon with American ingenuity. And it's going to be the same with this. For thousands of years, we did not know what was causing the failure of cities, civilizations. We discovered what it is 30 years ago, and we're ready to fly again. And I believe once the citizens in most cities, and I've recently spoken in Australian cities as well, start demanding that policies be formed holistically, we will be amazed at the ingenuity of Americans, the knowledge that's available, how people will rally about, and just as the humans flew to the moon within 70 years, I think we'll be amazed when we see how the human spirit can soar and what we'll be capable of doing to save our families, our businesses, our cities, and all of humanity from this enormous danger that faces us, the perfect storm that is approaching. Thank you.
Allan, thank you very much. Here's a question for you. So first of all, thank you for the work you're doing. I think everybody here is grateful for what you do in coming down on unmanaged grazing of indefinite number of livestock year-round. And if I understood correctly, did you say 40 million acres was what's going on with holistic grazing now? So the question I want to ask you is, what have you learned from any failures that have happened along the way in these 40 million acres?
Almost everything we learned was from a failure.
And yeah, great. And what specifically have you run into?
What we finally tapped into was what I've just said, that behind our failures for centuries was just this simple inability to address complexity. And it is that profoundly simple. So again, that came from many, many failures until we could get consistent results. After discovering that in 1984, where anybody makes decisions holistically in their businesses, in their family lives, nothing to do with land, we start to see much greater consistent success.
I see. But in terms of what you failed at in the 40 million acres, I mean, what's an example of where you thought it was going to work, holistic grazing, and for reasons of the psychology in the region or
well,
the ecology?
one I mentioned on the TED Talk, I incorrectly interpreted we had too many elephants causing the destruction in national parks. My work that was checked by other scientists led to us killing 40,000 elephants, and we were wrong. It got worse. Another was developing the game ranching industry, because I believed if we got rid of livestock, we could put it right with wildlife. Again, I was wrong. Another was publishing papers on how the land had got beyond reclamation. One of the few papers I could get published because my peers agreed. Again, it's embarrassing today. I was wrong. We are now producing solid grassland on that. I could go on and on with my failures. What matters is we finally got to where anybody can get consistent success.
Terrific. And we thank you for that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.